Hello, my friends. My name is Keith Patrick, and I'm a singer-songwriter for a band called Under Moonlight. A few months ago, I decided to create a little show where we would talk about music, talk about life, dive into the creative process, and most of all, we'd relax. We'd breathe. And we'd remember how truly phenomenal it is to be alive on this earth. I decided to call this show The Quiet Hour. It's a space where we can take our time, where we can be our real selves, and hopefully gain a greater understanding of each other. So without further ado, I am honored to present to you The Quiet Hour, Episode 1, featuring my good friend and bandmate, Tommy Moore. Let the journey begin. Hello, hello. My name is Keith Patrick, and I sing for a band called Under Moonlight. To my left is my good friend Tommy Moore, who, of course, is the drummer of Under Moonlight. And today we're here in episode 1 of The Quiet Hour. We're going to talk about music. We're going to talk a lot about kind of stories behind Under Moonlight. And of course, we're going to dive deep into Tommy's background as a musician and a songwriter. This man is incredibly talented in his own right.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Likewise.
With this project, Flugel, which is just this amazing pop project that we're going to talk all about. So we'll dive into all those subjects, and while we dive into them, we might as well do it with a good drink in hand. So today, we're drinking Scotch. Cheers. Thank you for doing this. Yeah, thanks for being here, man.
Happy to be here.
Alrighty. So, I wanted to begin with kind of a high-level question that I've never asked you, and I'm always curious people's perspectives on this one. So, what do you think drives you to make music, and like what motivates you to create songs just as a human being?
I think that kind of can sum into one answer as like I need to. Kind of like I don't really, when I start writing a song, it's not like I have the topic in mind. It's kind of like just what, I'm a big fan of stream of consciousness, and like whatever emotion or feeling that I happen to be feeling that day, you know, generally music is like my way of expressing that.
Yeah.
And I can't really see my life without it at this point, and I've been doing it so long now that it kind of just like is a natural thing, and that like I almost feel like I feel something is missing when I don't create some sort of music from that. But a lot of it's like, you know, the classic stuff too, like relationships, what I'm doing, my job, the bullshit of life.
Yeah.
The great parts of life. Been like listening to a lot more kind of pop music and like more relatable lyrics recently, and like starting to learn how to like relate to others, because I feel like I used to write music just stream of consciousness, like almost like purely, like almost like Animal Collective or something.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
like
about
words strung together.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about your lyrical approach, but we'll get to that in a second. But sorry to cut you off. I do think you have a very unique lyrical process and approach to songwriting. I guess we might as well go into it now. I'm curious, like, with your lyric writing, what I noticed a lot is that you tend to like gravitate towards subjects that are a little less common. Like, you know, you have that song Starry Night where you talk about like food groups, or you've got like letters in the mail. Like, you have these subjects that, what I find interesting about them is that they are less covered ground than like your typical like heartbreak, romance, all that good stuff. You tend to like skew towards like just the less traveled pathways. And is that like intentional? Is that as a result of this kind of stream of conscious writing, or is it just like you like writing less common kind of topics?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all that. It's like, I think those less common topics and like kind of words that no one really hears in every sentence just kind of like catches the ear.
Yeah.
So it's part like to like be catchy, you know, and like be unique. But also it's just kind of like how my brain works. Like, I studied environmental science in school, and I was playing music the whole time too, but like I got really into like Latin names and like gardening and like studying plants and botany and zoology.
Yeah.
And like got just really inspired by all of that stuff at the same time as I was kind of like writing a lot more songs.
Mm.
And it kind of like, they kind of developed together, and where I was like, the lyrics turned into like just things that I was hearing around me. And, you know, I still think about that stuff. So like food groups and like just random occurrences and things that aren't related to music at all, I'll throw in there, because it's like more painting a picture of life than like trying to like write a song. And generally I think those are just more interesting than a classic like love song or something like that.
Totally.
Even though I love classic love songs and I've been like getting really into those.
Yeah,
But that's just kind of been like,
yeah, done a billion times. And like, full disclosure, I'm guilty of writing plenty of heartbreak love songs, including my latest single. but like, but
nothing wrong with that.
I frequently though have the inverse thought of you, where I'm like, I need to cover topics that are less common, because I do tend to tread towards romance, and I'm like, as I think about the next batch of songs and kind of the next record for Under Moonlight, I think about, okay, what am I not talking about in my life? Whatever's going on, or just like things I'm passionate about. Sometimes I think about like, why don't I write more about politics and things that matter in our world? And so I envy in some ways like your approach and like your biases towards these like less common topics.
Ironically, like this, I'm working on a new EP for Flugel, and like all the songs I've been writing recently are pretty like love heavy.
Yeah.
But also I'm getting married in a few months, so it's been top of mind.
I was gonna ask you about that, yeah.
But yeah, so it's kind of ironic. I'm kind of flipping the other direction now. But, you know, just like using specific call outs and things that you wouldn't think about, so even if it is a love song, like I just wrote one where it's like the playground of love is like kind of the analogy, and how we're like trying out all the rides and stuff. And just like, I like to think of like kind of a specific word or a place or idea to like base the song off of. Mm-hmm. To where like, oh, the suggestion is playground. Now I can think of like slide, hula hoop.
I do the
like
same thing.
Mulch.
I do the
like,
exact same thing.
All these words kind of come off if you choose a location for your song. That's just another.
Yeah, I do a similar approach where like I come up with a concept and I will free write for like the first 20, 30 minutes, where I'll basically like have the concept and then I think about exact thing, like what other objects come to mind, like what imagery fits within this universe that I just am talking about within this song. Carnival, our song, is kind of like that, where I just started thinking about like carousels and a billion other kind of imagery related to carnivals. I wanted to ask you about the first couple years of music for you, and like when you were first writing songs, and I'm also curious like what you started with, because I know you're like this sort of virtuoso musician who you play drums and guitar and you sing, but like what did the first couple years look like for you as a musician, as a songwriter?
So the very beginning was probably of my dad's influence. He was in a bluegrass band, and they would have their rehearsals in our living room. Mm-hmm. And he would basically like one day, because I would always sit in on him and just kind of like sit there and like jam. And one day he like gave me a mandolin and like taught me like a G, and was just like play that the whole time. Because like in bluegrass you can kind of do that. So that's where like it started. And then I like started playing along with his friends, like a bunch of like 45-year-old dudes and me.
How old were you at this point?
Probably like 8 or 9.
Really? So you're just like tiny,
yeah, I was just like
tiny Tommy Moore, just
yeah,
like...
tiny Tommy Moore, just like trying to hang in there.
Yeah.
And then eventually I learned C and D.
Yeah.
And then I picked up guitar for a little bit, and then I went. Then I was like, bluegrass isn't very cool, and I like rock and like metal and stuff. So then I went to drums. My parents were gracious enough to like buy me a drum set and put it in our basement. And then like once I had those tools under my belt, and I had started piano when I was 4 because my parents were crazy like that. But once I had all those tools under my belt, around like freshman year of high school, I started writing songs. And around the same time, my dad bought this like Korg digital like 8-track recorder.
Cool.
Which was like $800 back then. Which like looking back on that's really stupid, but he taught me like how to record like a track and like bounce it to a CD. And like so I just started doing that with like my guitar and like my drum set. So like the first songs I recorded were like an acoustic guitar into a mic and drums.
And do you remember your first? I always think about this, like what my first song was. I kind of remember it, but also like don't. Do you remember like your first song?
No.
Same.
I remember the chord progression.
You do? Okay, so you can.
I was obsessed with Other Side by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, which is embarrassing to say now. And it's still the passcode to my phone, actually. 6415 is the chord progression to it.
Okay.
And I like wrote like 17 songs with that chord progression because I loved it so much.
It's a common progression.
So it was probably that, but I don't remember the lyrics at all. But yeah, and then all through high school, kind of grew and grew. I got really into drums and like playing in other bands. And just kind of like was always playing music. That's kind of like was my practice. Like
right.
I just surrounded myself with people that played music. I wasn't like the type of person that would like shed for hours and hours in practice. I would just like try to play with people.
Yeah.
And that's where like a lot of my
which is the best teacher. I mean, like in the end, it's the thing that, yeah, let's walk and talk. We'll continue it on. But I agree that like that's definitely the best teacher is playing with other people because you're just going to learn how your thing fits into the larger picture of songwriting because that's, I think a super important jump for any musician is like, you start by playing in your mom's basement, but then it's very different to go from that to like, okay, now I have to write a part that works in this whole group and like actually sounds good for a song. And then you start to get into like, oh, songwriting, like that's, you know, like we're all in service of this greater thing, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think learning drums and like being a good drummer in a band really taught me that because like your job as a drummer is to like be that puzzle piece and like be that main backbone, but like fit the song, right? Like everyone hates the drummer that like plays the metal riffs on the like indie song.
Yeah.
Because you're like, stop, slow down.
Yeah.
But like finding where you fit in as a drummer kind of helped me write songs because like I'm like, oh, I know like how songs should be arranged to sound like good because as a drummer you have so much control over if the song sounds good or not.
Yeah. You do. You have a lot of power.
So yeah, I think that helped me out a lot, and that's why Flugel stuff is so rhythmic because I just love the effect that rhythm can have on the song, like in other instruments, like in the synths and the guitars and the bass. And I feel like not a lot of other people do that, like almost use those instruments as drums in the band. So
yeah, no, and
it's always been a big inspiration.
I hear that in your music where you because a lot of instruments can be percussive, like vocals can be percussive if you make them percussive. So you can hear, I think, in your songs with Flugel's project, like you can hear that you do approach things as a percussionist to a degree, which I think is cool because like a lot of songwriters don't. Like a lot of songwriters are more like in my style of like singer-songwriter. Like we know how to write melodies and everything's based around that, and yours is in some ways kind of inverted, which is cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off.
No, I just find a lot of enjoyment from it.
Yeah.
Partially, it's like I just like it, but also it's partially like an industry thing. I'm like, maybe this will catch on if like not a lot of other people do it.
Yeah.
But
or it
who
just
knows?
sets you apart. Yeah. Do you with Flugel? I'm curious. You know, it's an amazing project. You make these just like brilliant, airy pop songs. They bring so much joy to people. Do you have in your mind sort of the goals for where you want to go with it over the next couple of years, like your long-term kind of motivations and like the vision for it over the next, I don't know, couple of years?
We just renovated our practice space, so we want to record a new EP with a bunch of new songs, new fresh songs, new fun songs, and make a bunch of videos. I'm really into YouTube. I think most people are really into YouTube and videos at this point in our lives, and
absolutely,
we're making a video right now.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just want to get on that type of media really bad and like be more of a visual project.
I think it's something that everyone's kind of gravitating towards video, it seems. And
yeah,
you know,
I mean, and as a consumer, that's what I want to see generally.
Yeah.
Like when I'm a musician, so I'll like look up an album, but like most people aren't like that. Like they'll go to a YouTube video first, which is totally understandable. I love doing that too, because you get to see the whole thing. Because we're running over love. Do it, find out quickly. I just can't get enough.
What do you think of the Scotch, by the way? I meant to ask you this.
It's good.
Yeah.
Smooth.
I feel like it's pretty... I'm not a huge Scotch guy,
I'm not
but...
I'm not the one to ask. Like, I have no comparison, really.
Yeah, nor do I. I mean, you know, with these shows, like we're gonna do a different drink every time, and it's interesting we start with Scotch because I know the least about Scotch. Like we're gonna do, you know, margaritas in a different episode, and I know a ton about tequila, but nothing about Scotch. But to our taste buds, they're good. So, as you know, we just put out some songs for Under Moonlight. You played on them. I don't know if you remember, but
yes, there was a while. I mean, I kind of blacked out the whole last year, but I do remember that.
It was a rough year. No, I'm kidding. But you played drums on Impossibly Distant and Incredibly Close. It just came out, and we did it back in winter, back in December. And I'm just curious your perspective on the whole process. Like, how was the recording process for you, and just like how do you think the songs turned out? I'm just curious, like your overall view on, you know, the things that we just made.
They were great. The recording process was a little different as a drummer for me, because it's like we kind of like went piece by piece instead of like play through the whole song. We did a few of those, but like you knew what you wanted, and I like just played the parts essentially, which is like really fun as a drummer for me, because like I come from like jazz and like jam kind of stuff, like heavy improv drumming, where it's like I used to be in a band where we would play like 4 or 5 hour sets and like 25-minute songs of like, you take a solo now, you take a solo, like, so I'm like nothing is written down type of mentality. But to have like a studio session where it's like this is the part, it kind of brought me back to band class, like in a good way. A lot of people have negative connotations of band class. I have very positive ones. I loved band. I
mean, how many bands, how many like future rock bands and pop bands were started as a result of what you learned in band class back in like 6th grade? So yeah, I mean, we're all
like
thankful.
Brought me back to like, oh, I'm like kind of in like this indie pop orchestra, and these are my parts.
Totally.
And it was fun. I had a great time. Cool parts, cool songs. Yeah, it was fun to like see the process. And I'm forgetting who recorded it.
Oh,
their name.
Our friend Max Steger, who's amazing. I mean,
he's amazing. Yeah.
He, you know, has done a bunch of pop stuff. Back in the day, he was in a band called Empires.
Yep.
You know, so Max, the story with me and Max is kind of a long one. It's like a 10-year story with a very long gap in between. Where, when I was a young kid, I was like 18, 19. There was a band in Chicago called Empires, and they were amazing. Like at the time, this is like 08-ish. They were blowing up in Chicago. They were like the biggest band in Chicago, and they were kind of on this fast track. And as a kid in high school, I just kind of like idolized them and loved them. So I would go to their shows in the city, you know, as I'm a senior in high school, and just be like, wow, this is so cool. Like, I want to do this. And I remember talking to Max briefly after some shows, because I knew at the time that he did some recording. Like, even then, he was doing a little bit of engineering outside of his band. And I remember just thinking, like, man, I really hope at some point I can record with this guy, because all the albums for Empires were always amazing, like flawless sounding. And so in my mind, I'm like, I just gotta do it at some point. Then fast forward like 10 years, I was thinking about Under Moonlight, and I was like, who do I want to produce this, and who do I think would bring the right approach to this type of project, this sort of like ethereal, atmospheric pop project. And I thought like Max was like the absolute best guy to bring it to life, because his approach, and if you're watching, definitely check out Max Steger's stuff. He's just brilliant and everything. Or check out Empires. But I knew he'd be the exact right guy, and it just was so serendipitous, because I messaged him out of nowhere. I emailed him, and he was like, yeah, I love the song, let's do it. And it was just so weirdly serendipitous that 10 years go by, and I'm like, okay, cool, let's do it. Like, this is actually happening. I didn't ever think it would really, frankly, I didn't think he would get back to me. So. Yeah,
so it's the same thing with the engineer that did Flugel stuff, Packy Lundholm. Also should check out. He was in a band, I Fight Dragons, back in the day.
Yeah, I love them. They were huge back
in the day. They were huge, and now he's like in like 20 bands or something. He's all around. But I met this dude, Kyle, who ended up being my drummer for Flugel, on Reddit. Because I had moved to Chicago and posted on Reddit, hey, I recorded these songs, does anyone want to play them like live with me? And he was like the first one that got back. He was like, yeah, let's meet up. And we met up. Anyway, the band formed, and then he was like, we were talking about making the album, and he was like, oh yeah, I have a friend from college that has like a studio in this Fort Knox practice studio where we practice. And like, it just like blossomed from there. I met Packy, he became like a really good friend of mine. He like loved the tunes. I love when that stuff happens.
I realized the other day when I was preparing for this that I've never told the story of how Under Moonlight got its name. Like, why is it called Under Moonlight? And I think it's a good story to tell, because I think it is reflective of what I'm trying to achieve to a degree. So back in 2017, you might remember there was the Great American Eclipse. There was like the solar eclipse that happened in the summer. And at the time I was in a different band. And we decided, as part of this band, we were gonna do a tour in celebration of the eclipse. We were basically gonna do a tour all week, like shows every day, and then we were gonna play during the actual eclipse, like on the day. And I was all excited. So we drive down to like the Kentucky border. We're basically like the Kentucky-Illinois border, and we set up our gear. And I should note that like we're in like a field in the middle of nowhere. There's like nothing around us for miles and miles and miles, but we wanted to play like at the point of, they call it like the point of totality, like in the middle of the eclipse. So we're in a field in Kentucky, and we set up our gear. We play like the first 15 minutes or so of the show. And the show's going fine, and then 15 minutes in, the eclipse happens. And we stop the music because we wanted to pause for a moment, and we look up. And like, I'll never forget the moment when I first looked up at that eclipse, because I'd never seen one before. And it was just like this beautiful golden ray of light around the moon. And I remember in that moment, like a very distinct feeling of like infinite just gratitude and peace and happiness. And it was just like a very unique feeling that I've had only a few times in my life. And I remember in that moment, as weird as it sounds, like I knew I had to make songs that gave me the feeling I was having right there. Like if I could make songs that gave me this feeling of gratitude and peace and serenity, then I was doing something right. And so, weird as it sounds, I, right in the moment, knew it needed to be called Under Moonlight. Like the name just kind of hit me right there. And it, you know, it's those moments don't happen that often in music where you just know something is 100% right, but I did there. I knew this was the type of music I was going to make, and this was going to be the name.
That's
and
awesome.
Here we are.
You were wearing the sunglasses, right? When you looked up at the sun?
I was because I didn't want to go blind. I think I did, low-key, I
wanted to set that straight.
I think I did take them off for like a teeny second, because I was like, what does it look like
just to
now?
experience? Yeah.
But no, then I put them back on. But I'm sorry.
That's sweet. Well, I'm glad you told me that story, because I had no idea. I mean, it was a very poetic name, like, regardless, but that adds a lot more meaning to it.
Yeah, I mean, I realized like I probably should tell why this thing became a thing, because it really was a pretty big moment. And I hope that if anyone is like watching, I think there's going to be an eclipse in like 2024. Definitely go to an eclipse one time in your life if you can. It's incredible, and I think you will not forget that moment. Like it really does. I think everyone's experience is going to be different, but you are not going to forget that moment. It's still very vivid in my mind, like how you feel, how things look. Also, the way that light behaves in that moment, I won't go into the whole science of it, but the way that light behaves is insane. Like you feel like you're on psychedelic drugs. It's insane, like what happens to the earth. I don't even want to like spoil it, but it's wild, like that moment, and there really is nothing else like it. Of all the different moments in your musical career or milestones, which do you cherish the most? Like what means the most to you as just a songwriter, as a musician? You can take it however you want it.
Honestly, my favorite part of playing music in my life was a jazz trio that I was in called Ghost Pipe Trio in Asheville, North Carolina. It's me and my buddy Sean, and me and Sean met freshman year of college and became like attached at the hip kind of friends. He was a bass player, I was a drummer. we were in like 20 bands together throughout like us knowing each other and living in North Carolina. But it was like the last 2 years we were both in North Carolina. We met this dude, Leo, who was like this guitar player that was like completely self-taught, like couldn't read music, played like this like old beat up harmony acoustic that like he drilled, like cut a hole in it and like drilled in this pickup.
Awesome.
But it sounded like so good, and he was like so intentional about music, and like just could rip. Like he was like mainly played gypsy jazz, but like he could play all sorts of jazz. And we just had so much fun. It was almost like this like three people just like meeting, and we like already knew what the other person was gonna play, it felt like. And we got this residency at this bar in Asheville every Monday night from like 8 to 11. And we like just did it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they loved us, and like we were getting better, and I was like learning how to like play with both these people in like a whole new way. And then like we all of a sudden, like Leo was like, hey, I have all these connections in France. And then we also had some other musicians in our network that were like, oh, we can hook you up if you go to France, type of thing. And all of a sudden we like had booked a tour in France with this like jazz trio, and we did like 2.5 weeks in France with this thing that like started like really kind of spontaneously, just because basically we got that gig, that residency, before we ever played together. So our first gig playing together was like the first night of the residency. And
in
Leo
France?
No, in Asheville.
Oh, okay. Still amazing.
Like, so like the band formed like that. Like Leo basically called me and Sean and was like, hey, I got like this gig every Monday night. They like want to hear me play guitar. Do you guys want to like come sit in on bass and drums? And we did. And he was like, this is tight. Let's do this every time. So that's how the band formed. And then it like led to going to France with like two of my best friends. It was sweet. It was like one of those things that like only music could have done that, you know?
I mean, that's like the adventure of a lifetime, man. I mean, it almost reminds me of like, it sounds like something out of like a 1920s novel where like you're playing in Paris in a jazz band, and it's like Ernest Hemingway's at the
literally,
bar.
it was like that, dude. It was
Americans
really fun.
in Paris. That's amazing, man. That's weird. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to this idea of serendipity, right? Of like, you just met these dudes, it clicked right away, and somehow you end up in Paris or France for two weeks, and that's brilliant.
I could write something. I'm really into theme songs.
Okay, let's talk. Yeah, I'm thinking about trying to figure out what, it's like a short little thing, but
no, I'm talking like a 4-second, like.
Right.
Quiet hour.
Yes.
Why don't you come on?